Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos. I'm Andrea Determan, and I'm a worship associate for this congregation. Our minister, the Reverend John Cullinan, has today off, and I'm delighted to welcome Renae Mitchell as a member of our church, and she's going to be a speaker today, and a friend. Welcome, Renae, and welcome to all of you, whether you are here in the sanctuary or watching online. I don't know. Where am I looking at online? Right there? Okay. Okay. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the interconnection of all. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you're at this moment, and wherever you are on your life's journey, you are welcome here. If you are joining us for the first time, we invite you to talk to any of us after the service and return next week when Reverend John will be back in the pulpit. If you are watching online, please sign our virtual guest book. There's a link to the book in the notes below this video. Everyone is invited to the fellowship hall after the service for refreshments and conversation. You may take your food and drink outside and remove your mask if you like. Again, welcome. We're glad you are with us. We're glad you are here. Thank you. Let us begin to worship. Into this home, we bring our hunger for awakening. We bring compassionate hearts and a will towards justice. Into this home, we bring the courage to walk on after hard losses. Into this home, we bring our joy and gratitude for ordinary blessings. By our gathering, we bless this place. In its shelter, we know ourselves blessed. Let us open our minds and our hearts to one another as we gather for worship on this beautiful morning. Please rise in body or spirit for our hymn, and you can remain standing for our affirmation when we're finished. read the affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. And service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace. To seek knowledge and freedom. To serve life and fellowship. To the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each and with all. Please be seated. Please be seated. A candle has been lit to thank the volunteers for the children's retreat they had last night. Tina said it was fantastic. A candle has also been lit for gratitude for the joy of children at the kids' retreat overnight last night. Here at the church, gratitude for the game among all of us. Let us share a moment of silence. Let us join together in meditation. We pause in the stillness to rest for a moment, to quiet ourselves so that we can feel what stirs within us. Each breath draws us closer to the pulse of life. With each exhaltation, we make room for something new. May we find in this gathering the comfort of those who care. May we encounter patience along our growing edges and compassion in our most tender spots. Here, may we find the inspiration and encouragement we need to face our challenges and nurture ourselves. And in the presence of suffering across the globe, may we redouble our efforts to practice kindness where we are, with the hope that the light of our actions travels the light of faraway stars. May our gestures of compassion and generosity seed possibilities. May we walk humble with one another. May we walk humbly with one another, choosing reconciliation over resentment as we try to live right-sized. When life presses in and shifts us off balance, when pain assails us, when frustration mounts, may the rhythm of our breath steady us and bring us back to a place of gratitude. Leaf Seligman, and let's take 3 deep breaths. Here's Tina.
Okay, so this is a time for all ages, a story time. So for young and young at heart, we invite you to come where Nina is hanging out on this young worshipers space. So if you want to come up, you can. If you don't, that's okay too. Oh, hey, you want to come up? Okay. So today we're going to read this book, and it's kind of about a hard topic, but we're going to try to simplify it so that kids can kind of understand, and maybe some of us adults too. So this is called a kid's book about a really big word, systemic racism. That's a big word. And it is by Jordan Theory. Okay? So we're going to look at this book together. And so this is a book about systemic racism. And believe it or not, it's actually for kids. All right? I have to say, this book was really hard to write. Jordan says this, not me. Systemic racism is incredibly difficult to understand, even for grown-ups. But to help make sense of it, I'm going to start with an example. And this is Jordan saying this, because as you can see, my skin color is not black. It is more peach tan colored. So Jordan says she is black. Did you know that it's really rare for someone with my skin color to write a kid's book? So with the black skin color. When I was a kid, I almost never read a book by a black author. Wow. That might seem normal or like no big deal, but it shouldn't be normal. And it is a big deal. But that's how it works. Systemic racism seems normal. It's almost like it's invisible, something that's always around, but you never quite see it, unless you look really hard. So my hope is with this kid's book, it's to help you not only see it, but want to do something about it. About racism, systemic racism. Oops. You might already know what racism is. Maybe some of you know what that means. It's when someone is excluded, treated badly, or hated because of their race or skin color. That's not very good, right? Not good at all. So systemic racism is when racist ideas are built into laws, schools, stories, and other institutions in a way that collectively makes life much harder for people of darker skin colors, right? So let me give you some more examples. When Jordan, the author, was a kid, the only people on TV that looked like her were athletes, comedians, or rappers. When Jordan was in school, she was suspended for things that her white friends were not. When Jordan was in class, she never had a teacher that looked like her until she went to college. When she was a teenager, she was stopped by the police multiple times, while many of her white friends were not. Looking at these moments, it may not seem like it was about the color of my skin, but systemic racism isn't always obvious, which is what makes it so hard to see. But before I understand that, I used to get frustrated and angry, even at myself. But as Jordan grew up, Jordan noticed that she wasn't the only one experiencing this. Other people of color were experiencing the same thing. That's when she started to notice it was a pattern. She learned that if you're black, you're more likely to be stopped by the police. It can be harder to get a job. It can be more difficult to buy a home. You're less likely to go to a good school. You're less likely to be in charge. And most heroes in stories don't look like you. And as you read these things, you might feel sad or even angry, right? I'm, pretty angry about that. You also might start to wonder how it got this way. Well, the reason is long and complicated, but I'll do my best to explain. Since the start of this country, the United States, many people with white skin whose families came from Europe were given land, opportunity, and access to money, while people of color, those with black and brown skin, and the indigenous people that lived on the land before white people arrived were attacked, killed, and sold into slavery. Lies were told about people of color to scare white people, to make white people believe that people of color would hurt them, steal their property, or give them diseases. Yes, really. Sadly, many people believed those lies. Then, even after they fought for freedom, people of color still didn't have as many rights. They still had more obstacles and experienced a lot of discrimination. New laws were even created to make life harder for them because many white people didn't want to share. Over time, the value of land and money increased, which gave white people more and more for their kids, grandkids, and so on. Today, this unequal balance of who has land, money, power, and rights still exists and affects people of color. It affects their ability to live in nice homes and neighborhoods. It affects their ability to start their own businesses and donate money to good causes. It affects the amount of money that is put into building schools and hiring great teachers. It affects their ability to speak their own languages and preserve their cultures. It affects their ability to tell their own stories or make their own TV shows and movies. It also affects who has access to medicine and good doctors. It affects how they are treated by the police, government, and court system. All of these things are a result of the big word we're talking about, systemic racism. And even though people of color have more equality today than they have ever have, new forms of systemic racism are created all the time. So we need to change the system. Who's with me? Raise your hand. Who wants to change the system? Woo! I want to change that system and erase the racist ideas that live in our laws, schools, stories, and other institutions. We need to create ways for people of color who have been left behind for so long to catch up so that money, land, great schools, quality doctors, and basic rights are equally available to everyone. Woo! Yes, equality, equity. Systemic racism isn't new, it's just hard to see. But once you do, it's hard to ignore. So practice seeing systemic racism every day. And speak up, speak out. In the schools you go to, movies you watch, neighborhoods you live in, point it out to your friends, point it out to your family. Because systemic racism can't be undone until we open our eyes and see it. So, yes, who's with me? Speak up, speak out. Woo! Yeah, speak out. All right. So that is what we're going to do, right? From here on out, we're going to see it and speak up and speak out and work together to get rid of this bad system that has been instituted in our country. And that's our story, all right? So we can work together to do that, and it's possible.
That was beautiful, Nylea. And Kathy. Oh, right. How's that? Is that better? Great. September 12th, in the year 2001. I was an undergraduate student at a university in Louisiana, and I was working in a coffee shop that morning. There were almost no customers that day, presumably due to what had happened the day before. Of course, the terrorist attacks of September 11th. A group of young white men approached the counter and angrily asked me, "I can't tell what you are. What race are you?" Now, I can't remember exactly what I said. I was so terrified when I realized what their question implied. My apparent ambiguous ethnicity, my mother is Latin American, could be rewritten as what they were looking for: a Middle Eastern person who deserved to be punished for daring to remain in their country. They continued to barrage me with questions. I do remember that. They were trying to get me to admit what they wanted me to be. And I managed to dodge their questions until, thankfully, another customer showed up and compelled them to give up. I remember being extra friendly to this customer. Despite my anxiety, chatting as long as I could with him. He was an older man, probably a faculty member, I would guess. And I tried to keep him near me for as long as possible, until I was sure the threat was gone. And indeed, those young men eventually wandered off, but I still have awful visions of what could have happened, because I could have shown them my birth certificate, and it still would not have made a difference. As jarring as that incident was, I was not terribly surprised by it. I was stopped and asked those questions more often than any other growing up in Louisiana. I can't tell what you are. What race are you? Where are you from? Well, I'm from here, I would answer. I'm American, born in Louisiana. What race are you? Where are you from? Well, I didn't ask those last two. In any case, my curious interrogator would insist that, no, you must be fill in the blank. The scholar Homi Bhabha examined this form of imposing identity onto others as a distinction between the visible scene versus the theatrical scene that are written onto a person of color. This person is seen through a racist lens, while they unknowingly are acting out the part of a threatening alien who doesn't belong. In the Unitarian Universalist effort to create a beloved community everywhere, we provide a space like this to examine sites of the seen and endeavor to see others' inherent worth and dignity beyond how we may want to see them. Now, imposing one's perceptions onto others isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, we do it all the time. We project our admiration, our judgment, appreciation, and criticism onto others without realizing it unintentionally. Our feelings toward others naturally fill in the gaps that are just left by our faulty memory. So perhaps I can show you what I mean. So I'd like for you all to close your eyes, okay? And imagine one of your neighbors here in the sanctuary that's sitting somewhat close to you right now, someone you don't live with or see very often, okay? Hold that person's image in your mind and think about how you feel when you encounter them. Now imagine how their hair looks today. The marks on their face, freckles, moles, birthmarks, the color of their eyes, the shirt they're wearing. Imagine all of that. open your eyes and turn and look at this person. Okay? They may be facing away from you for a moment, but okay. Now sit back comfortably in your chair and think about what was different about seeing this person versus the image that you held in your mind. How did you feel when you saw them? Did they appear different from what you imagined? So this simple exercise touches on the idea of the scene, what we impose on others in our imagination, and then the reality when we look at someone as they appear before us. Unfortunately, too often, individuals are stuck in the theatrical scene. That is, they cannot and refuse to look at others beyond how they imagine them, the part they want them to play in their own view of the world stage, where persons of color are merely players of parts they want no part of. In recent years, we've seen increased violence centered on this theatrical scene based on how America and an American is imagined. An American as envisioned by the ideals of white supremacy, who is racially white and entitled to rights and privileges that are exempt from others. Those who don't fit this vision become threats to that vision. This white supremacy American ideology is the basis from which many of our lawmakers make decisions. In January of this year, the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, was asked if he had a message to people of color in light of his party's blockage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. In response, McConnell said, "Well, the concern is misplaced because if you look at the statistics, African American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans." African American voters are voting in as high a percentage as Americans. Yep. It's on YouTube, look it up. Whether or not this statement was consciously intentional, its meaning is very clear. African Americans and implicitly all persons of color are not included in the category of Americans. But the United States has a long history, of course, of inclusion and exclusion based on this perceived ideal, and the denial and overlooking of anyone who may intrude on the reality of Americans' diversity. So I'd like to share one particular example of this through 4 images that I present to my students in my race and ethnicity class. Has anyone seen these before? Anybody? Yeah? Okay, yeah. Great, so these 4 paintings are by an artist named Norman Rockwell. And they were promoted as portraying the freedoms that Americans are entitled to. So released in the Saturday Evening Post in 1943, the paintings were considered iconic of what it means to be an American. In the World War II and post-war period, these paintings were seen in nearly every public space in the US. Courthouses, police departments, in the windows of shops, and were repeatedly published in newspapers and magazines. The images promoted the ideals that Americans were fighting for in World War II and the freedoms that needed to be protected post-war. And I'm sure I do not need to tell you that there is not a single person of color in these images. But during the time that they were popular, over 1 million African Americans enlisted and fought in the war. And then they returned home to segregation and oppression. The Zoot Suit riots occurred, where white servicemen harassed and fought with Latinos in Los Angeles. And of course, Japanese Americans were interned in prison camps, et cetera, et cetera. But from the civil rights era of the 1960s onward, activists have pointed out the fiction of America portrayed in these paintings, and artists have recreated these paintings to better represent the reality of the diversity of America's population. And here's a very recent example, but one of my favorites. So these, the originals portray freedom of worship, freedom from fear, freedom of speech, freedom from want. Okay, let's see. Oh, they're not showing up. All right. Look up. Oh, there they are. Okay, thank you. Yeah. A bit different, right? Yeah. Okay. So even within my lifetime, these paintings appeared on things like stamps. Let's see. So these are called Four Freedoms by Emily Shore and Hank Willis Thomas, and they are photo montages. Oops, let's see. There we are. So here are stamps. These images, this was within my lifetime. So despite the fact that they've been criticized, right, and pointed out as fiction, very much a fiction, they were still cropping up. Okay. So if the extent of the oppression of persons of color, this sort of linguistic and cultural oppression remaining in the theatrical scene of white supremacist imagination, if that was the limit of it, it would certainly still merit our protest against it. But unfortunately, that's not the extent of it, is it? Because this sort of media, imagery, language, political rhetoric, is helping to fuel violence that leads to actual physical and often life-threatening harm. Perhaps you've heard a few months ago in Buffalo, New York, a man shot and killed 10 people in a grocery store. He left behind a detailed manifesto stating clearly that he wanted to reduce the number of black people whose existence threatened the dominance of white people. In 2019, in El Paso, Texas, a shooter killed 23 people in a store and left a manifesto, citing the threat of the replacement of white people with persons of color as his motive. In 2018, there was a shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh that left 11 Jewish members dead, carried out by a shooter who posted on social media that Jews are helping to transport undocumented immigrants to the US from Latin America. So many examples. Another recent instance includes the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017, where Ku Klux members and neo-Nazis chanted, "You will not replace us, Jews will not replace us." The "you" in this instance was in part directed at the counter-protest that was taking place there in Charlottesville, which sought to ensure the removal of a Confederate statue. The counter-protest was made up of persons of color, activists, and numerous UU and other faith leaders who supported the removal of the statue and the racism embodied in it. What these violent acts have in common is not just the fact they are clearly committed against Jewish people and persons of color. They also share a clearly similar justification. The phrase, "You will not replace us," was chanted explicitly in Charlottesville, but was echoed by perpetrators of the other tragic events I mentioned, and numerous others I didn't. The conspiracy of the replacement of white populations was the motivation for each incident, as the perpetrators themselves made clear. And it emerges from a pervasive ideology called white replacement theory, or white genocide. It's not a new idea, but this replacement theory receives the most attention when there's a shooting or other violent terrorist act carried out in order to eliminate this imagined threat. So what exactly is white replacement theory? It's a conspiracy theory stating there's usually a Jewish plot to diminish the influence and numbers of white people through the immigration of non-white people. And it's one of the most popular ideas embraced by white supremacists today. It's, of course, a deeply racist idea, and it can be traced back to resentment with the emancipation of black people in the US and the increasing immigration of persons of color as industry flourished in this country. But it's really in the 21st century that we see this ideology crystallize, as the US demographic is seen as becoming majority-minority. In 2011, a French author published the book Le Grand Remplacement, or The Great Replacement in English, which gave this conspiracy theory a framework and a name. In spite of all of this, persons of color have reached positions of prestige and political power, causing them to be undeniably visible in the media and intrude on the scene. Just to name a few, there's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Hey, if you're watching. New Mexico's own Deb Haaland, Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, all highly visible political figures. And we increasingly see persons of color in popular media, such as Star Wars films, the popular Black Panther movies, right? Athletes like Serena Williams and Venus Williams and Simone Biles, and so on, et al. The increasing visibility and visible achievements of persons of color undermine the scenes portrayed in Rockwell's paintings, scenes that white supremacy desperately clings to, even today. This visibility has also been seen by conspiracy theorists as proof of a conspiracy's existence. So why learn about this grotesque ideology? Why pay attention to an idea as detached as replacement theory? The reason, I argue, is that, of course, it drives the actions of many of those who are willing and have the ability to carry out mass violence against persons of color and Jewish people. And with the available of high-capacity weapons, this is all too easy to do. But this violence is a symptom of the fact that white supremacy is gaining a foothold in our political system. There are growing numbers of our representatives in government who hold these beliefs, who ring alarm bells about non-existent immigrant invasions of our southern border, et cetera, advancing this theatrical scene of white supremacy. Those growing numbers of politicians who hold white supremacist beliefs means a growing threat of decreased rights for all, especially decreased access to the voting booth. This is a dangerous path because when a population within our country is unable to vote freely, none of us can vote freely or participate in the direction of our country. I would like to conclude with a thought experiment centered on an ancient story, and it may seem entirely unrelated, but bear with me. The account is based on Theseus, a mythical culture hero who had numerous adventures, including fighting the Minotaur in Crete. But I'll actually focus on the ship on which Theseus traveled when he returned home to Athens. Has anyone, sorry, this isn't showing up very well. Has anyone heard of the story of Theseus' ship? I know you have, Galen. Okay, so a few of you have. Yeah, so the thought experiment goes like this. Theseus' ship was harbored in Athens, Greece, and the ship was memorialized to commemorate Theseus' triumphant journey and his nostos, his homecoming. In gratitude for this happy occasion, Athenians pledged to sail in this ship to a divine place called DeYoe each year. And each year that the journey took place, it had to occur in this very ship. The ship Theseus himself rowed. Of course, over time, the boat aged, and each rotted and worn-out plank had to be quickly switched with new ones in order to keep the ship in resilient sailing condition. Over several years, philosophers began to wonder, there is so little of the original ship of Theseus that remains. Can we still claim that this is Theseus' ship? Or is it an entirely new boat? Can an object or entity that has had all of its components renewed remain fundamentally the same object, the same entity? This question has bedeviled philosophers for hundreds of years. And as a thought experiment, it can be argued either way. But I would like to take the ship out of its thought experiment context and use it as an allegory. I think it clearly illustrates the strength in the diversity of the boat's ever-changing parts. The boat remains seaworthy and strong precisely because of its new and diverse materials. Our country is changing, just as the boat continuously changed, not due to some replacement conspiracy, but simply because demographics are changing, as they have since the earliest appearance of humans on the planet. Human beings have never stopped changing, ethnically, culturally, racially, and I see strength in our diversity. As the boat's caretakers saw strength in the ship's new parts. And the renewed strength of this boat, like our country, is sufficient to carry all of us on board. The French philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote that we are not humans having a spiritual experience, but rather we are spirit having a human experience. If we could see each other as facets of that spirit, whether or not you believe this idea is real or true, we could better see, I believe, how much we truly share with each other. May it be so. Thank you. Oh. Let's have a moment of silence.
Before I introduce the offering for today, I need to make an announcement that James Carroll's class has been canceled. Right? Okay, Tina, you have any more? Okay, so, all right, so if you want any announcements, look in the back of your office of service. And before we go into that, I'd like to remind you and those in Webb world that we'd like to remind you that information about upcoming events can be found on our website and our weekly emails on our Facebook page and in this month's issue of The Voice. And now, our offering. Our offering is an opportunity to share some of what we have with the wider world. Our Share the Plate partner for this month is for the Tewa Women United organization. 100% of all offered this month will be given to our partner. You can place cash or check in the basket that I'll get ready to distribute as it passes. And there is an offering box in the back of the sanctuary by the door. If you prefer, you can give using the Givelify app or givelify.com. May the offertory music lift your spirits, and may what you give bring you joy.
This song was written by Woody Guthrie, and it's going to be very familiar to you, and you're definitely invited to sing along in the chorus. He wrote verses that in 1940, when he originally wrote it, that have not really become a part of this song as we usually sing it, and I've included one of them in today's offertory. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking down the ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless sky
Thanks, Susan. We both got a little emotional back there, I think. It's beautiful. We have gathered here within these walls as believers in a shared conviction that we are a community that extends and receives love, that we are a people who celebrate diversity, that we shall transcend hatred, prejudice, and oppression, and that we can extend our hands to one another in loving acceptance. Let us move from this safe haven encouraged and refreshed for the journey ahead. Thank you.